Our seminar on person and neuroscience aim at bringing together evidence in neuroscience with philosophical views on the notion of the person. As we gain scientific knowledge of the world around us, we may wonder what our place is in it. Are we one more thing, one more organized arrangement of elementary particles among others? The more we study human beings, the more we realize that while living in the world like any other physical reality, at the same time we transcend it. We solve problems, we bring novelty by creating societies and culture. We also strive for explanations. In particular, we try almost compulsively to understand ourselves. And one way of approaching our human condition is looking into the brain, that sort of black box where all the executive functions and central organizing seems to take place. In a way, it appears that decoding the brain could help us to figure out who we are. For that reason, the goal of our seminar was to assess philosophically some of our contributions from neuroscience on how we should understand ourselves as persons. We basically posed the following question: does the neuroscience perspective cohere with the philosophical tradition view on personhood? This interaction between neuroscience and philosophy was a way to inform and update scientifically our philosophical thinking. And we also were confident that philosophy could provide neuroscientists with guidelines for self-evaluation concerning method, argumentation, and as well as conclusions that lie beyond the scope of science. We started our course reviewing the historical development of the notion of personhood, from the Greek prosopon to Boethius' definition, Aquinas' valuable contribution, and finally to contemporary personalisms that understand the person as coexistent, as someone who exists with. This means that while objects, things exist in isolation, even if they are physically related to a whole world around them, a person is such if it exists with others. This perspective on personhood informed our exploration of the evidence, methodology, and scope of neuroscientific approaches to the human person. So our approach to neuroscience started with an assessment of its methods and with an inquiry into how reliably we can extrapolate experimental evidence about the brain to conclusions about who we are and how we act. Alan Weisenbacher presented on the different technologies used to study the brain, evaluating their accuracy and analyzing the inherent challenges that the complexity of the brain poses for the neuroscientist. The brain plasticity and multifunctionality, among many other features, creates problems of redundancy, multiple comparisons, of correlation versus causation, of how to parcel brain activity to find specialized functions. So Alan also critically assessed some common pitfalls in interpreting experiments and how the popularization of neuroscientific tests does not always reflect the actual experimental evidence. On this subject, we also read up on a common flaw in the popularized neuroscientific talk, the mereological fallacy, that attributes activities and mental states to the brain instead of to the whole person, which leads to a new version of the ghost in the machine problem. After reviewing these methodological presuppositions, we delved into different aspects of the brain and person entanglement. One first consideration was our relation to our surrounding reality. Does the brain facilitate or impede our cognitive access to the world? In other words, can we trust what we experience? Do we obtain accurate and reliable knowledge about the physical world that surrounds us? Is reality something external to us, or do brain processes construct it? One of the topics that we approached was how to assess the neuroscientific evidence related to perception. Our guest speaker, John Cyril, objected to the view that we access directly our own sense data and only indirectly we get to know the world, which is an old philosophical mistake repeatedly refuted by philosophers, including Cyril, that nonetheless reappears many times in neuroscientific talk. Examining the commonalities and differences that we have with other animal species, we encounter a phenomenon, human language, which makes us wonder if such an ability also requires specific brain structures only found in humans. Our guest speaker, Terence Deacon, addressed these and other related questions, taking an evolutionary perspective, according to which both the brain and language co-evolved. Deacon presented evidence for the commonality of brain structures in apes and humans, while defending that we are a symbolic species, in which the lines between nature and nurture are not just blurred, but inextricably intertwined. Our nature is to have culture, and having that culture has altered nature. Closely related to sociality is emotion. As embodied beings, we experience a wide range of emotions that facilitate or alter our experience of the world and our interactions in it. Our guest speaker, Sonsoles de la Calle, presented some of her research on this field as well as other relevant studies. Popularized versions of neuroscience also present our unity as individuals as something resulting from the interaction of millions of neurons. The question that emerges is whether our personal identity can be reduced to our brain maps, whether we lose our identity when the brain areas that support episodic memory are damaged, or when certain emotional events dramatically change the way we understand ourselves. Our speaker, this time Jennifer Hooding, focused her presentation on the latter question. In analyzing the issue of personal identity and brain activity, an inquiry arises of whether brain connectivity could be modeled and codified. Based on the analogy of the brain as a digital computer, there have been attempts at modeling brain structures and neuronal activations. The idea is that it may be possible to upload the brain to some digital platform where our identity will remain intact and perturbed by the challenges of illness and death, perhaps awaiting a time when it will be able to be downloaded again into, hopefully, much better hardware. Here, we reviewed some philosophical arguments that object to the project of taking the brain to be a computer, literally. A very much discussed topic is the interpretation of the empirical results related to free will. Father Anselm Ramelov presented both philosophical and methodological objections to Libet-type experiments. The students also read up on literature that assessed the interpretation and scope of these experiments. We also analyzed arguments related to the nature of intentionality and the role of the unconscious in decision-making. Lastly, we approach a question that has received a lot of attention: the neuroscience of religious experience. Olga Luchakova-Swartz offered a map into this literature as well as a valuable assessment coming from the phenomenological tradition. From a different perspective, Alan Weisenbacher presented how understanding the laws that operate in brain processes and architectures can help to the practice of pastoral counseling and spiritual care. For example, grasping the difficulties that people with degenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, dementia, or Parkinson, or other conditions like depression, schizophrenia, PTSD, addiction, have to face makes for better informed decisions and treatment. For example, helping with addiction through deliberate neglect of specific neural paths, interfering with our unconscious and the automaticity of created neural connections. In the case of PTSD, disconnecting the memory of events from its emotional response, etc. Students really appreciated the participation of all these guest speakers, and they saw this event as a unique opportunity to bring together contemporary issues, problems, and scientific research with philosophy. So the overall experience of the seminar was very, very positive.